I smiled at the person and I thought, oh, like he smiled back, he was nice. And then I just felt this person following me and this kind of looming presence, and he would not go. It's just so sad because I feel like every woman has a story, and that's why I love this storyline so much, because it brings out the other female characters' stories.
So the inspiration for Aimee's storyline in series 2 came from a personal experience that I had myself. This thing happened to me about 5 years ago, where I was on my local bus and I was on the way to King's Cross station. I was going to visit someone in Scotland. It was really early in the morning, and I got on, and the thing that was really strange about it was that the bus was actually basically empty, except for like there was like one other woman who was like at the back of the bus. And this man got on and he just made a beeline like straight for me and came and like sat right next to me, which was just so weird, where I was like, you have so many seats that you could sit on, but you've come and you've sat right next to me. I had my bags on the floor and he put his feet on my bag so that like I couldn't move. And he started like kind of inching himself towards me. And then he was like sort of rubbing himself on me and then touching himself.
Talk about things you'd like to do.
Sorry.
You got to have a dream. If you don't have a dream, how you gonna make a dream come true?
What are you doing? He's wanking on me!
I mean, I think everyone knows this feeling, but I just went into this, like, it was like fight or flight. I just suddenly was like, I have to get out of this situation. Like, I think this person means me harm. Like, I need to go. And so I just like grabbed my stuff and like I got off the bus. It was so creepy because he moved seats so that he could see me out the window, like as the bus went off. And I just burst into tears. And then it was really strange because I kind of shook it off and like got on with my, you know, my weekend or whatever. And then it just really stayed in my head, and I started having sort of panic attacks where like I couldn't get back on my bus. I didn't like getting on the tube, and this lasted for sort of like weeks afterwards. And in the end, the thing that actually helped me was I was sort of part of this like feminist sort of women's group on Facebook. And I ended up like posting a thing about it. It was like way before any of the Me Too stuff had happened. And just hearing like other women sort of saying, oh, like that happened to me, and I totally understand where you're coming from, just made me feel, I don't know, like more kind of heard, and that gave me a bit of sort of solace, and I think made me feel a bit braver.
So about 8 years ago, I was on a bus. I was on my way home quite late at night, and I was on the phone to my mum and really distracted, and didn't really notice the guy next to me until I suddenly looked down and realised that his hand was on my leg. And I kind of froze in shock, and before I could think or move or do anything, he moved his hand up and grabbed me in the crotch, grabbed me between the legs. And I stood up and I moved away from him. And because I was on the phone, I said what was happening out loud. I said, Mum, I'm on the bus. This guy's just groped me. And everybody on the bus heard, and everybody looked away. No one even made eye contact with me. They looked down at their phones or out the window. No one said a word. And it made me feel panicked and embarrassed, and like I shouldn't have said anything. It was as if they had said, they might as well have said, whoa, don't bring this up. You deal with this. This is your thing. It made me think, oh God, it must have been my fault. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, or I was wearing the wrong thing. I got off the bus and I ran the rest of the way home, and I never told anyone what had happened. And it was only later that I looked back and realised it wasn't just me that got such a strong message from the people around us, you know, this is your problem, you deal with it, this is normal. It was also the man on the bus. He learned you can be on a public bus, you can sexually assault a woman, you can have her say what's happening out loud and no one will do a thing. You can get away with this, in other words, go ahead, do it again. It just happened to fall for me in a week during which I had a number of other incidents of quite serious being followed home by a man who just wouldn't leave me alone, wouldn't take no for an answer, being shouted at in the street by some blokes really commenting about my breasts. And at the end of this week, I sat down, I was thinking about it, and it just suddenly hit me. If those things hadn't all happened in the same week, I probably wouldn't have thought twice about any one of them because it's normal. And it just made me suddenly have this moment of thinking, why is this normal? Why is it just the way things are? I started talking to other women and just saying, for the first time ever, have you ever had anything like this? And the stories just poured out of every woman I spoke to.
Something remarkably similar happened to me on a train platform when I was really young. I smiled at the person and I thought, oh, like he smiled back, he was nice. And then I just felt this person following me and this kind of looming presence, and he would not go. And I was walking through crowds and I was thinking, my mum always used to say, try and find a family. So like that, sometimes find a family and stand with them and say, I'm really sorry, but I couldn't see any families. I could only see at that point it was like, I could only see men. I was like, why are there no women here? And then I went over to this guy and I was like, can I just walk with you? Can I just walk with you? And he was kind of looking at me like I was a freak. And I knew this guy was like, yeah, touching himself behind me, walking down this train platform. And that was the worst part, was feeling ignored and feeling like, why does no one know? Why can no one see what's going on here? And that's what I found so moving in Aimee's storyline was, of course, the event is so traumatizing, but what traumatizes her even more is that she has such faith in the world and she has such faith in people. So when she's looking around after it's happened, she really does expect someone to go, I'll help you.
Yeah.
And nobody does. Everyone's blank. And that's the thing where it's like, I used to feel so safe and now I don't. This man smiled at me, had a kind face. He didn't look like he was capable of that. How do I navigate in the world now that I know that I'm not safe? And now that I know that when I smile at someone, it might invite that kind of behaviour.
Can I get off the bus, please?
Watch it with the
Sorry. Can I get off the bus, please? Yeah, I just need to get off the bus, please.
It can make you feel very vulnerable, where you start blaming yourself, or you can start to feel like maybe, it was down to something that you might have done or said.
It's so good, I think, that you focused on the reactions of the people around Aimee on the bus, because we so often wrongly focus on, well, what did she do wrong and what could she have done? And the truth is, if any one of those people had said something or stepped in, it would have made a huge difference. It would have sent her the message that it's not her fault and she's not alone and it's not normal and just something that happens. And it would have sent him the message, you can't get away with this. No. That's the most heartbreaking thing about the scene. The guy who does it gets the message, this is okay, no one will challenge you, you can go and do it again.
I think we've all been in that situation where you've seen something happening to another woman, and there's this strange connection where you sort of look at each other. Like when I was on the bus, there was another woman on the bus, and she looked at me like, oh my God, this is awful. But she also didn't jump in. But it's like, I don't really expect her to do that either. But it's like, we need other men, I think, to be saying, this is not right.
I think Aimee is the perfect character for this to happen to, because she operates on this plane of like trust, and even with her mean friends, she doesn't think they're bad people. She just thinks the right thing to do now is to say, I'm gonna stand up for Maeve because Maeve needs me. She's always kind of trying in her way to do the right thing, and she doesn't really dislike or hate or mistrust anyone. So this kind of, I keep saying that she's like the good witch in The Wizard of Oz. She's like in the bubble that comes down, and then all of a sudden that bubble's just popped and she's like crashed down to earth. And it's like she has this identity crisis because it's, well, everything I thought was true isn't. If I smile at someone, something bad might happen to me. If I'm nice to someone, something bad might happen to me. And she doesn't think she deserves to be traumatized by it. She thinks, she keeps saying it's not a big deal. It's just a little stain. It's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. Because she feels like she doesn't deserve to be blindsided by it.
So, what do you want to do for your birthday?
Nothing. What happened to this cake exactly?
It didn't look so bad before, but then I was on the bus and a guy wanked on my leg and I got a bit of a shock and I smushed the cake.
What?
Do you think it'll stain?
I love these jeans. You have to report it.
It's fine, they were only cheap.
No, you've been assaulted.
I think he was just lonely. Or not right in the head or something, which is weird, because he was quite handsome.
Ames, this is serious.
It's silly. I'm fine, honestly.
Okay, I know what I want to do for my birthday. I want us to go to the police.
So even when it's happening, she's like, okay, this thing's happening to me, which is really weird, and I'm not sure why it's happening to me, but I need to just take care of this cake, and I need to get it to Maven. If I can take care of this and make sure she has a happy birthday, then all that'll be fine, and it'll just be, and I feel like that is such a female instinct. It's, okay, what do I need to do? What's the next action that I need to do, rather than just stopping and going, how did that make me feel? Even though that is a terrifying thing to do, is actually to sit in the feeling and to get angry about it, because anger isn't really allowed if you're a woman, you know, especially if you're someone like Aimee, who feels like her main value is sweetness and kind of easy breeziness. You know, she thinks, oh, I'm not, you know, don't look at me. I'm kind of, you know, I'm fine. I'm just here, like, having a nice day. I'm okay. And if I'm not that happy person, then people won't want to be around me. But this thing's happened to me that's made me actually angry and sad, and I don't like that, and I don't like that it shifted my personality, because now I don't really have anything to offer anymore, and I don't know how to function now that I'm the one who needs support. And that's why she really isolates herself, because she thinks, well, I'm just going to be a pain. If I'm around people with this negative energy, I'm just going to be a burden, so I'll just kind of remove myself from everyone and isolate myself. And I think that's what we all do as well, because we are taught to accommodate from such a young age. I was like, if you're going to be a bit sad and a bit kind of a negative Nelly, why don't you just kind of, you know, keep yourself to yourself, and, you know, because you don't want to upset anyone, and you don't want to take up that space. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And I think this trauma forces her to start taking up space, because she can't not. It's like this thing that wants to rip out of her.
Anything about me?
You don't know anything about me.
Stop fighting over a stupid boy! Ames, why are you crying? Because I can't get on the bus.
It was really difficult to go back to that time of being 17 or whenever. But that's because I'm older and I've matured, and I know that I'm allowed to be a multifaceted human being who experiences a range of emotions, and I don't have to just be a sweet, digestible woman. So I would permit myself to get angry now. Back then, it was going back into that mindset of I'm not allowed to feel this way. I need to just suck it up and get on with it.
You're so right about that being something we're taught to perform as women, being polite, not making a fuss. One of the first girls that I ever worked with on this particular topic was a 14-year-old girl who'd been sexually assaulted on a bus. And the man that did it had followed her off one bus and onto the next, and she felt uncomfortable and she knew it was weird. But she was only 14 years old, and she'd been taught that she shouldn't be rude to grown-ups.
Exactly.
And so when he sat down next to her and started talking to her, she felt like she had to answer. And she'd also been taught that she shouldn't make a fuss and she shouldn't kind of get in people's way. So when he started touching her, she didn't want to say anything because she didn't want to disturb the people around her on the bus. And at 14, that girl had been taught, as a girl, you need to be quiet and not get in the way, not make a fuss. You need to be polite. But no one had ever thought to teach her, no one has the right to touch you without your consent. And we don't. We teach women, like you say, this is normal, this is part of life. What were you doing? Were you asking for it? What were you wearing when it happened? Well, you were probably flirting. Maybe he just liked you. All of the reasons that we have. Are you overreacting? Are you sure that's really what happened? Did you imagine it? Are you sure he was touching you, especially in a crowded bus where it so often happens? How can you be sure that's really what was going on? Surely someone would have said something if you really said what was happening. We have so many different ways to tell women, don't say anything. Maybe it was your fault. Did it even really happen at all? Is it any wonder that we don't talk about it?
I think that thing about not making a scene, not wanting to disrupt other people. I feel like even I'm 33 now, and I feel like that's still in me on some level.
Always. Conditioning,
it's so
isn't it?
conditioned. It's so buried.
I mean, I even had that when I first started wearing a skirt at school. I always wore trousers. I was such a tomboy, and then the first time I wore a skirt was when I was 15, and it was summer. Like, that was why. And I got pulled up and taken out, but my head teacher told me off. She was a woman, and she told me off for wearing a skirt, and I was like, why? She's like, oh, because we've got male teachers running the playground. And I was like, I was also just like so confused. I was like, I don't understand how she was like, Mr. So-and-so's just said your skirt's too short. I was like, why was he looking at
Exactly.
I don't
message that
understand.
The child wearing the skirt isn't the problem in that scenario.
Yeah,
It's
do you
the
know what I mean?
adult.
Because he
Look.
couldn't control his
Right.
feelings.
So I'm so confused. Like, whose best interests do we have? We need to be on side of our girls, like, and stop this.
And
Actually,
not teach them
Yeah.
that it's normal. Because if that happened to you at school and then you're in a bus a few years later, you're thinking, well, this is what I learned at school. This is my fault. I'm wearing the wrong
Absolutely.
thing.
You have a low top
I'm
on.
bringing it on.
Yeah.
You know, even talking about feeling like you couldn't smile at people. You were made to feel like it was your fault for smiling at him. Of course it wasn't your fault for smiling at him, but that's
Why
what
did you
the world
engage? Why
tells
did you
us,
engage
right?
in
I
it?
must have done something to deserve this.
Yeah.
I like that you focused on this because I think often when we talk about sexual assault, it's such a big spectrum, right? It feels like something very, very explicitly intimate is happening in a very public place. Often a lot of people don't think they can even get help for something like this, like Aimee's character.
See, she's got a proper problem.
You've got a proper problem. Pothole on the high street. Bloody council.
Come on, let's go. It's basically like he sneezed on me or something.
Came on you, Aimee. Yeah?
Yeah. Cum is kind of like a penis having a sneeze. That means when you swallow someone's cum, it's like eating their snot.
Just take a seat, we'll be with you in a bit. Hi there, how can I help you?
Hi. This is my friend Aimee. She got sexually assaulted on the bus.
I got jizz on my jeans. I mean, we're probably wasting your time.
You're not wasting anyone's time, right?
That scale you talked about, that spectrum where we're told it's okay to talk about very serious forms of sexual offences, but we shouldn't talk about others, we don't do that with anything else, right? Nobody says the police should never tackle any fraud cases until they've solved all the murders.
Right.
With everything else, we accept that there are different things that happen and no one's saying they're all the same, but they're all completely valid to tackle, except with this, except when we're trying to shut women up, basically.
I think it cuts through a lot of bull when something like this happens, and it can really show you what's important to sort of say, I'm sorry that happened to you, and the girls say it to each other, and it was very moving, and it's a very small moment, but it's that idea of having someone acknowledge that you've been through something absolutely terrible.
Yeah.
And also to show sort of how you can help someone who's been in that situation.
Yeah, like not trying to fix it necessarily, just matching it. Just
Yeah.
being like, I hear you.
Just listen to
That's
them.
awful.
Yeah. And all of these girls can sit there in a room, they don't have anything to talk about, they're not friends normally, and yet this is the one thing that they can all bond over.
So you can't get on the bus because you think that man's going to be on it again?
No. It's more that he had this really kind face. I remember because he smiled at me, and he didn't look like some wanking psycho killer. So it's like, if he could do something like that, then anyone could. I always felt safe before, and now I don't. Probably sounds stupid.
It doesn't sound stupid. I was groped at the train station last year. We were going to a gig in the city. This group of guys walked past, and one of them grabbed my and it really, really hurt. So I sometimes feel funny in crowds too. It was like they thought my body was theirs or something.
Yeah, like we're public property.
A few years ago, some boys were catcalling me. This woman told me it was my fault because my shorts were too revealing. So I went home and I cut them even shorter. Because them.
Good. Why should you have to change your behaviour because of what they did?
Exactly.
I used to go to the local swimming pool all the time when I was a kid. One day, this guy flashed me his penis in the pool, and it looked all dangly and funny under the water. I told my mum about it, and she wouldn't let me go back anymore. It's sad because the pool's my favourite place to go.
That's so unfair.
I guess. But statistically, 2/3 of girls experience unwanted sexual attention or contact in public spaces before the age of 21. So, it's not unusual.
A man followed me home from work about a year ago. Every time I sped up, he sped up. It was so scary. He ran off when he saw my dad, which made me angry because I don't want to be dependent on another man to protect me.
I'm sorry that happened to you.
You too.
Thank you.
You're so right about that. I'm sorry, rather than doing like detective work and saying, so what, but when did you move away? And did you say this thing to him? And did you try and give the message that you didn't want him there's no questions asked. It's just, I hear you and I'm sorry.
I'm sorry that happened to
And
you,
that
yeah.
can be the most relieving thing when you feel like you don't have to explain yourself and give any disclaimers or give any justifications, or it's just, this is what happened, and someone just saying, because it does feel like at that moment that person is taking a little bit of that pain away from you, because they're saying, I'm sorry and I see it.
I see you.
I see it and I see you, and it's real.
I believe you.
Yeah,
I believe you.
And it's like just the release of telling somebody, you know, and having someone listen to you properly, and that release does make it, I think it does make it a little bit easier, because it then makes it more like, it's not my fault that it happened, and all of the other 50% of the vampire, like I call them vampires, you know, the voices in your head that chat shit and sort of are just sort of always going on. And it's your fault, what did you do, whatever. You can cut half of that when you tell someone and they just listen to you. Like you can stop so much of that anxiety and so much of your own, I don't know, self-hate or self-blame or whatever, which I think comes hand in hand with it, and it's something that has to be acknowledged as well.
Yeah.
Is probably a lot of my friends that I talk to that have been through something like this, the hardest bit is telling someone.
So, fair hair, clean shaven, 5'8" or 9, and a blue jacket.
It was kind of aqua.
And was he already on the bus?
Yeah. I think so. He might have got on at the second stop.
Well, it's really important to know what stop he got on at so we can get as clear a picture as possible. So you said you remember smiling at him. Was that after the first stop or the second?
Sorry, what's that got to do with anything? Are you saying she shouldn't have smiled at him?
Charges like this are really hard to convict. And if we do actually catch the guy, the questions are going to get harder.
Can I have my jeans back, please? I'm gonna go. I'm sorry to make a fuss.
James, what if he does this to someone else? I know you can do this. Please.
You're doing brilliantly, Aimee.
Yeah.
Just take your time. Try to remember.
He was already on the bus.
I've really noticed a difference as well since Me Too and all of those kind of conversations have really been brought out into the open. Like, I feel like I used to talk to my female friends about stuff like that, but it would almost be in a jokey kind of way.
Yeah.
And
Funny
then,
anecdote for you.
yeah, and now I feel like it's like, oh, it's okay to take this seriously.
I had that once where I worked with somebody that just used to slap me in the bum. But because I started working there when I was 16, I genuinely thought it was okay. I said it to someone as a joke and they were like, that's bad. And that's happened to you.
Oh, it's the most.
By the way.
And I've noticed, a lot recently where there's that shift of, oh my God, hilarious story, the creepiest guy, so, and then someone just goes, that's not funny. It's completely wrong. And I think the fear when Aimee finally opens that box up and she gets sad and she gets angry, and yet the girls still like her.
Oh, out of curiosity, what did you come up with? What binds you together?
Other than non-consensual penises, miss, not much.
Are you gonna be okay?
I think so. I don't feel sad, I just feel angry.
I know something that might help.
Now that I've just taken that leap of faith and been vulnerable and shown a side of myself that maybe Aimee has thought up until now that that's kind of like an unattractive or like displeasing side of her. And then when she finally kind of can't do it anymore because she's just so exhausted and so overwhelmed and so triggered that, and then she lets this part of herself out that she's kind of pushed down so much, and the girls are like, no, we're with you.
Yeah.
Let's go smash
Let's
some
go
shit.
smash. Let's find
Let's
that
do
rage.
it, and I'm going to cheer for you
come
while
on.
you do it.
What do I do?
Think about something that makes you really, really angry and then smash it as hard as you can.
I'm angry that I'm not very good at baking cakes.
Yes!
Yes!
Woo! Come on.
Go on, Aimee. I'm angry that Steve keeps trying so hard to make things better, but he doesn't understand.
talking about it, people said to me, no, sexism doesn't exist anymore. You know, women are equal now. Like, this problem, it's harder to imagine it now with the conversation we're having, which is great. But at the time, 8 years ago, people said, you know, women are equal now. You're making a fuss about nothing. You know, you're looking for problems. And I thought, we can't fix this problem if people don't know it exists. We're all experiencing, we've all got these stories, but no one even knows they're happening to us. So maybe one way to try and move forward would be to bring these stories out into the light.
I agree.
And I set up this project called the Everyday Sexism Project. It started out as a website, and I just said, if anyone's got an experience they want to share, someone of any gender, any kind of, anywhere on that spectrum, from low-level sexist, sexual harassment, all the way up to discrimination or abuse. And I thought maybe if 40 or 50 people share their stories, we'll be able to say, look, this is still happening. You can't dismiss all of us. We weren't all getting the wrong end of the stick or making it up. And I thought that maybe then we could take it seriously. And actually what happened was that within months, thousands of stories had poured in. Within the first couple of years, we had 100,000 stories. Jesus. Now there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands. And suddenly we had this data set that was the largest of its kind that had ever been collected. And I thought, how could we use this to try and stop these things happening to other women in the future? So we took the stories we collected about really specific things. And instead of saying, as we so often do, well, what did she do about that? Or what can women do? I took those stories and I put them in front of the people who could change things. So we took the stories that were just from girls at school and took them into schools and took them to the government and said, we need sex and relationships education. This has got to be on the curriculum because look what's happening.
Yeah.
Obviously really relevant to the show. Like, kids didn't know that it was sexual assault. I didn't know when it happened. No one had ever given me that language to know that what was happening to me was against the law, because I'd just been taught it's the way things are. And we had thousands of stories that had just come from women on buses and tubes and trains, public transport. So we took them to the British Transport Police. They knew that there was a problem because they knew that at that time only about 10% of incidents of sexual offences on transport were ever being reported. But they didn't really know how to tackle it because people weren't talking about what was happening. Yeah. And we had all the stories, thousands of them, but no way to change things. So we brought those two things together and we used those stories specifically and those women's words to retrain about 2,000 British Transport Police officers as part of a thing they launched called Project Guardian. And it meant that suddenly they realised why people didn't feel like they could talk about it. They realised that if you tell your story and someone dismisses it or doesn't believe it when you first come forward, you'll never ever feel like you can come forward again. And it really overhauled the way in which the British Transport Police dealt with sexual offences on public transport and raised the reporting rates and the detection of offenders by about 25 or 30%. So it was just a way to try and not just have it be about telling stories, but actually telling stories in itself is so powerful. We hear from so many people who say, until I found this website, I thought I was alone. I never told anyone what happened to me because I thought it was my fault. Sometimes women in their 80s and 90s who've carried the pain of what happened to them for years, and suddenly they see these other women's stories and it's like this lifting, this moment of thinking, it's not just me, it wasn't my fault, it's not okay, it's not the way that things should be.
Like, the girls and boys need to understand these boundaries, and we need to talk about sex in a way that is actually happening and educate ourselves so that we don't hurt each other.
Yes, and at the moment we don't. There's nothing on the curriculum at the moment that we have to talk about sexual consent, anything apart from biology.
So then we're teaching boys that this is okay, you know,
That it's normal.
You see what I'm saying? So we're teaching them that this is a completely normal thing, and then they go on feeling entitled. And then when they do something like that, they do something wrong, put someone in a situation, they don't even know they've done it. And it's so blasé. It can literally, as you say, ruin someone's life. And it can be stopped.
I think that's why
by
language
education.
is so important. Like, I think that thing about what you said when you were like, oh, I've been sexually assaulted. I found it even when I was writing the script. Like, there was a moment where I can't even actually remember if it ended up in the episode. It might have been cut out, but there was a moment where Aimee says, like, I've been sexually assaulted. And even as I wrote it, there was a little thing in my head where I was like, oh, like, has she? You know, because it feels so heavy.
Yeah.
And then you're like, yes, like, that is exactly what it is. And like, that's the language that needs to be used, not just, oh, he was a bit of a creepy guy, or that was a bit of a...
Or groping, that's the euphemism we
Yes.
use, right? We say groping because we don't like to say sexual assault. And
Yeah.
because people tell us it's not that big a deal.
Yes.
I think for a lot of girls, if they went to their friends and said, I've been sexually assaulted, and then described that scenario, they'd say something like, friends even would say, why are we being so melodramatic? That's not a sexual assault. Because we don't know. We grow up thinking, oh, this is just normal. And it's normal because it starts from such a young age. We know that nearly just under 1 in 3 16 to 18-year-old girls experience unwanted sexual touching at school. In other words, about a third of teenage girls are sexually assaulted at school. And if it starts then where do you go from there? If it's happened at school where you should be safe.
It's not good.
It's just so much more common than we'd like to think from such a young age. And if we don't talk about it because we're uncomfortable, then we don't give those girls the language to name what's happening to them. We don't give them the power to know that they can object. And like you said, we don't teach boys to know what their rights and responsibilities are in navigating relationships either. So everyone's confused and it just doesn't help anyone.
I think when you realise that it's like every woman that you know, it's almost like a sort of, like you're breaking out of some kind of psychosis or something where you're like, oh, like
You're not alone.
We're all just living with this. And we're not really talking about it or saying anything.
And it's so important, I think, that this storyline really looks at the long-term impact that it has, because so often these incidents are dismissed. It's not a big deal. Like, surely that's not that big a deal. It was just a one-off, whatever people say. And the truth is, just like Aimee discovers, it affects your whole life. It affects how you feel about yourself, how you feel in crowds, amongst other people, where you can go, how you can get there, your relationships.
What are you doing here?
Getting the bus? We're all getting the bus.
Getting on or what?
Give her a minute. It's just a stupid bus. It's just a stupid bus.
And we've just dismissed these stories and ignored them for so long. And finally, I think women and girls are speaking out. And it's the power of that collective voice. One of us speaking out on our own, we get shot down, we get ignored, we get dismissed. But when a whole group of us stand together, as Aimee's friends stand alongside her and say, this isn't okay, we're not taking this anymore, this has happened, it forces people to stop and listen to them, and hopefully it forces us to change the conversation and to really confront the idea that this shouldn't just be normal.
Yeah. It should be, we've all been there, let's talk about it, this needs to change, because we shouldn't have all been there.